Hello, everybody. How's everyone doing? Excited to be here today and share this story with you all. So to start on off, in the spring of 2017, I embarked on my first ever solo research project. This turned out to have a transformative impact on my life, more so than I had ever expected. Though I'd been lucky to work with wonderful scholars in the past, this was my opportunity to continue to develop my scholarly voice and to learn what contributions I can make to the field of higher education. For this project, I developed a study on a topic that was near and dear to my heart: the experiences of belonging for queer students of color at historically white institutions. And in this study, I made the decision to not only interview participants, but to also engage them in a method known as photo voice. With roots in participatory action research, photo voice allows a participant to show the researcher the embodiment of their experiences using photography as a tool. It was not until I was in the interviews with these participants, seeing their photographs, that I realized how powerful this method would truly be. You see, these participants were showing me different representations of what it meant to be a queer collegian of color at an HWI, encapsulating both positive and negative experiences. Like this picture taken by one of my participants, Cardigan, first-year student at Midwestern State University, the pseudonym for the research study site. Importantly, as I was in these interviews, listening to their stories and seeing their pictures, I started drawing parallels between the experiences that they were sharing and my own time as a queer professional of color in higher education, leading me to create this talk. So today, I'm going to discuss three main common themes that have emerged in my life as a queer professional of color in student affairs. First, I'm going to talk about the need to acknowledge oppressive systems in higher education. Second, I'll speak a little bit about the experiences of navigating siloed identity spaces. And third, I'll touch upon the joy that results from being with my chosen family. So to begin, I want to share you all a picture that one of the participants, Nicole, a second-year student at Midwestern State, who identified as queer and Afro-Latina, and the one that she showed me. So in response to the question, what does it mean to be a queer person of color on campus, Nicole showed me this picture. I was immediately intrigued. When I asked to elaborate on why she chose this picture for this prompt, Nicole stated that the rainbow beads in this jar represented her fellow queer people of color, being surrounded by what she described was a sea of whiteness. As Nicole stated, the rainbow beads and this photo conveyed the feeling that she rarely encountered other queer people of color on campus, and that Midwestern State largely privileged white individuals. As she put it, she was one rainbow bead in a sea of white beads. Taking all of this in, I immediately drew connections between Nicole's photograph and my own time in higher education. I am continuously confronted with the reality that colleges and universities were not built for people like me. And looking at the theories that serve as the foundation for much of the work that we do in higher education, I recognize the whiteness and heteronormativity that permeate these schools of thought. In fact, these models were oftentimes creating using samples of students who do not share my identities or come from similar backgrounds as me. When I became a student affairs professional, I similarly felt out of place in collegiate environments. In fact, to this day, I still have moments on campus where I feel as though all eyes are on me. For example, I still remember the time that I first felt like I did not belong in higher education. I was going to be attending an event for a new building on campus that had the Board of Trustees present. As I was walking up the stairs to the place where the program would be held, I immediately noticed the predominantly white environment, made up of mostly older white men. In that moment, I was that one rainbow bead in a sea of white beads. And to be honest with you all, I felt the discomfort in my bones. I felt it in my soul. It was one of the first times that I ever viscerally felt the old boys club rhetoric that still exists in higher education. And even among my fellow practitioners, my race and my sexuality are hyper visible. I've learned that becoming a professional does not mean that we are shielded from racism, heterosexism, or other systems of oppression. And more importantly, we as a field need to critically examine how we are complacent to or even perpetuate white supremacy, heteronormativity, and more. Furthermore, when I reflect back on that picture that Nicole shared with us, I remember that she described the rainbow beads as not only representing her time on campus, but also in white queer spaces. As Nicole and other participants discussed, queer spaces in higher education typically default to standards of whiteness, failing to comprehend the marginalization that comes with having more than one oppressed identity. Now, this reminds me of another picture shared by another participant, Makwan, a fifth-year student who identified as Black and gay. In response to the same question, what does it mean to be a queer person of color on campus, Makwan shared that it was common to only be seen for one aspect of his identity. To visualize this, he used the analogy of a singular lamppost in a field. As Makwan stated, being a queer person of color means that you are commonly read for only one identity, namely your race or your sexuality. Rather than seeing the beauty that comes with having multiple marginalized identities, taking a bird's eye view to see how multiple lampposts illuminate a field, Makwan was frequently only read as a person of color or a queer individual, only being seen for one singular lamppost. What this calls to mind are my own experiences navigating singular identity spaces in higher education, those designed to support one marginalized group, namely that of race, sexuality, and more. As someone who has been involved with the gender and sexuality knowledge community and the Latinx AO knowledge community in the past, I am proud of the work that these constituent groups are doing in order to support people with multiple marginalized identities. Therefore, I implore that we as institutions need to do the same on our campuses. When we create affinity spaces for marginalized groups on campus, we typically still default to standards of the majority. For example, we cater towards white queer individuals in queer spaces or heterosexual people of color in racialized spaces. For this reason, we need to critically examine these singular identity locations in order to make sure that they're welcoming of people with more than just one oppressed identity. Furthermore, we need to actively welcome this critique. I am lucky that I have found spaces here at NASPA and other spaces that embrace my racial and my sexual identity, and that I have found people who love me for me. In thinking about the answer to the question, where do you feel happiest? Nico, a gay Filipino male, showed me this picture that he took out at a gay nightclub. Though it is hard to make out exactly what's going on here, Nico absolutely lit up when he started talking about this picture. As Nico stated, this picture was taken during a night out with his friends who all identified as queer people of color. He stated that he felt happiest in this moment because he could just be himself, being embraced for all aspects of his identity. In reflecting on this story, I can't help but smile and think about my own communities. I am here because of my chosen family, those who recognize the multifaceted realities that come with being a queer person of color in higher education. These are the people who will tell me that I did not just imagine that an interaction involved a microaggression, who will hug me when I am down, when I feel like I don't belong, or who will just make me laugh endlessly. What is unique about these individuals is their ability to recognize that my QPOC identity shapes the way that I navigate the field of higher education. And more importantly, they validate this. Whether they share the same identities or not, they still love me unconditionally. And they also just make me feel like I matter. So, in reflecting upon the different parallel themes that emerged in these participant stories and my own, I come to the following questions, right? Where do we go from here? What does my story mean for all of you all in the audience. First, we need to continuously challenge the ways that we in higher education perpetuate these systems of oppression and the ways that we preference the majority groups, both for students and practitioners. In particular, we need to center the voices of trans and queer people of color, namely trans and queer women of color, in order to visualize equitable futures in higher education. Additionally, we need to always examine our singular identity spaces to ensure that we are being welcoming and affirming of intersectional differences. We cannot fight for racial equity in higher education without also fighting for people who identify as sexual minorities, people with disabilities, and more. I am only here because of the people who have done this for me, and I hope to do the same for others. And to the participants in my study, I thank you for your courage, your resilience, your brilliance, and for sharing your stories with me. I, along with other practitioners, will continue to fight and resist alongside you in order to create environments on our campuses and in our institutions that are welcoming for people who are just starting to embrace their intersections. Thank you.